Hello, my name is Andrew, and this is a Christmas story that I have written. It's for all children and those who are children at heart. It's called The Curious Squirrel. Once upon a time, there lived a very wonderful squirrel. She was about the size of most squirrels. She had the usual gray fur and a long bushy tail. She scurried along the ground and climbed trees, just like all the other squirrels. But what made this squirrel so wonderful was that she was so curious. When the tall oak trees began to drop acorns on the ground, the curious squirrel was busy gathering and storing nuts, just like all the other squirrels. But as she worked, she not only looked on the ground, but up into the trees. She wondered why the leaves had changed to red and gold, and she wondered why they fell on the ground. When the temperature dropped even colder, the curious squirrel added leaves to her nest for warmth, just like all the other squirrels. But as she worked, she wondered where the snow came from, and she wondered how it got into the forest. When the other squirrels were sleeping at night, the curious squirrel was tucked into her warm nest, just like all the other squirrels. But instead of sleeping, she would look up at the stars in the sky. She wondered how far away they were, and she wondered if there were other squirrels like her who lived on those stars. Every day and every night, the curious squirrel wondered. She wondered and she wondered. On the darkest, coldest night of the year, the curious squirrel was about to close her eyes and sleep, just like all the other squirrels, when suddenly she heard something. Something wonderful. The curious squirrel sat up in her nest to listen. It was the sound of singing. The singing was very quiet and far away. Though she had heard this sound before, she had never heard anything quite as wonderful as this singing. As it continued, the curious squirrel could tell the singing was coming from a different part of the forest. She was just like all the other squirrels in that she knew it was dangerous to move about in the forest at night. There were creatures like owls who hunted squirrels. She knew it was safer to stay in her nest. But as the singing continued, the curious squirrel continued to wonder. She wondered and she wondered. She wondered where it was coming from. She wondered who was making such a beautiful sound. She wondered and she wondered until finally she just had to go and see for herself. The curious squirrel moved as quickly and as quietly as she could, from branch to branch and tree to tree. Several times she stopped to rest, hidden in the needles of pine trees. She listened, and the singing was getting louder. She was getting closer. The curious squirrel reached the edge of the forest and the last tree in the woods. She knew it would be more dangerous out in the open field. There were animals like foxes who might catch her on the ground, and there were no trees to climb up and escape. She wondered if she should turn around and go back to her warm nest. But then the curious squirrel heard the singing again, and it was even louder. She was getting very close. As she scurried across the field, she stopped every few minutes to crouch low in the snow and look around for signs of danger. She soon became wet and cold. Once again, she wondered about turning around and heading back to her warm nest. But now the singing was very loud, and the curious squirrel could see a pine tree just up ahead. It looked like all the other pine trees in the forest, but this pine tree was shining with lights, little blinking lights, just like the stars in the night sky. The curious squirrel ran to the base of the pine tree and climbed up, all the way up the branches. And on every branch, there were little blinking lights, just like stars. And from each light came the sound of the most beautiful singing the curious squirrel had ever heard. The curious squirrel wondered about the lights, and she wondered where they had come from. And she wondered what they were. She wondered about the song, and she wondered what it meant. And she wondered why it was so beautiful. The curious squirrel wondered, and she wondered. And you know what? It was wonderful. The end. And so, I wish you a merry and wonderful Christmas, full of singing and magic. May it be so.